Now I went for a walk with him.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn. Hey, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Martin.
No, my apologies. No, Stanley Klinger was meant to be coming on, but he obviously hasn't got through.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, well, if he's able to join, then I'm sure he'll be here soon. All right, we are ready to go with Lunch and Learn. Another week. It is Parashat Korach this week, and not a tremendously fun story for the Jewish people, because it features the story of Korach's rebellion. Ooh, there's dissension in the ranks. The people are revolting, and Korach leads a rebellion, challenging the leadership of Moshe and of Aaron. Moshe and Aaron are brothers, and they occupy two of the most important leadership roles of the time. Aaron is the Kohen Gadol, and Moshe is the leader of the Jewish people. And their father had a brother, and that brother had a son, and that son was called Korach. So Korach and Moshe and Aaron were first cousins. And it was difficult for Korach to see the spread of leadership being contained within such a small section of the family. And that was part of the rationale for challenging the leadership. Because in his opinion, everyone was holy, everyone was capable. So who died and made you in charge? You know? So there is a challenge that is set. And Moshe therefore asks Hashem to help prove that the reason why he and Aaron are in charge is because it's God's decision. And so there is a whole process that has to be undertaken to prove this. So everyone that is trying to claim potential for leadership has to come with a fire pan offering, and we're going to see, who does God choose? Well, as we know, God chooses Moshe and Aaron, and the result of this failed rebellion is that Korach and his company are swallowed by a hole in the ground, which we're going to come to today on Pirkei Avot as well. Ooh. So they get swallowed up in the ground, and a bunch of other people die. And then there's a plague which has to be stopped, and Moshe and Aaron stop the plague from spreading through the nation. And then after that, there's another divine manifestation. That's a good word. A divine manifestation that God chooses Aaron as the high priest, because what they did was they put everyone that thought that they could perhaps be the high priest put a staff into the Holy of Holies, and it was only the staff of Aaron that sprouted, and that proved that Hashem was choosing him. So at the end of the story, everything's the same. Moshe and Aaron are still in charge, but there's been a whole bunch of people who get swept up in the commotion in the meantime. So it never pays to challenge God. It's never going to bode well for you. And then the final part of the parasha just talks about the priestly gifts and the Levite gifts, the things that would be allocated and divided off for the Kohanim and the Leviim. Bear in mind, they didn't receive any land in the land of Israel. They didn't have a portion allocated to them. They had some cities where they could reside, but by and large, they didn't have territories allocated to them like the other tribes did. And so, as I guess by way of some compensation, they are entitled to free food, be it from sacrifices, be it from tithes. So they are still able to nonetheless have some physical gifts given to them. Stanley Klinger is on the line. Welcome, Stanley. We hope you can get your tech sorted out. So that is a nutshell on Parshat Korach. Any questions or statements, comments? Rita?
Yeah, was Korach jealous? Was it a jealousy issue?
That certainly seems to potentially have been part of it, potentially. There's all different kinds of interpretations as to what was going on. It's quite a deep topic, as all topics in the Torah seem to be. So jealousy may have factored into it. On a positive note, he genuinely felt that perhaps everybody was equal, and therefore, why is it fair to give any greater responsibility or greater accolade to particular individuals? So there are interpretations that cast a very negative light. There are interpretations that cast a positive light. Either way, the rebellion is certainly viewed negatively, but the reasons and the rationale are talked about a lot in the commentaries. There is one amazing thing that actually just came across with regards to the concept of conflict resolution. It's so easy for people to butt heads, and at the end of it, everyone is a loser. But actually, what you see in this week's parasha is that after they've butted heads, after Hashem has drawn the lines, so to speak, as to who goes where, the next episode of everybody putting their staffs into the Holy of Holies and having Aaron's staff branch out, that is viewed as a respectful gesture, a way of nonetheless showing that people are still important, that people are still loved by Hashem, even though it ends up being that Hashem chooses Aaron. The process there was one of lifting and strengthening everybody, not just trying to squash people's feelings. So that's quite interesting as well. Any other comments or questions before we move on to?
Seems to be a bit of a difference between them wanting to be the high priest and God choosing Aaron. There was a bit of a competition there, and yet on the other hand, Korah challenges for the leadership, and he gets treated and his followers rather harshly.
Yeah. Primarily that will be because the way that Korach went about doing it. It wasn't just him, and the way in which he did it is viewed negatively. Rounding up 250 people to kind of storm Moshe and Aaron and intimidate them into questioning whether what they were doing was divinely ordained or not is not viewed in the most positive light.
Do you think he'd have done a better job?
Pardon me, Neil?
Do you think he might have done a better job and not left out for 40 years around the desert?
Well, that's part of the problem as well. They'd already been sentenced to 40 years in the desert. And one of the layers of interpretation of this is that this protest arose because Korach realized that he wouldn't be. I think that he realized he wouldn't be living the entire time and making it into the land of Israel himself. So maybe that's part of it as well.
Sorry, as far as I know, one of the midrashim, there's many.
Yeah.
Some blame it on his wife who coerced him.
That's
because
right.
he was an intelligent man, Korach. He was no fool. The interpretation that I liked best was that it wasn't that he challenged Moshe and Aaron, but his reason was not for the sake of heaven. He was doing it for his own self-grandisement.
Have we seen that
had
one?
he have done it for the sake of heaven, had he have had a challenge because he wasn't sure, then he wouldn't have had the consequence, because we've had other people in the past who was it who told Moshe he couldn't carry on the way he was? He had to appoint other people to help him.
That was his father-in-law.
Yeah, and he did it for the sake of heaven. He did it not for his own aggrandizement. He did it because he wanted to help Moshe.
That's right.
Whereas this, we believe, it's just a lesson in why you go about challenging people. If you challenge for the right reason, there's nothing wrong in it. But if you challenge for the wrong reason, then it shouldn't be done.
Yeah. Have we done that Mishnah yet, where we talk about a machloket l'shem shemayim, an argument for the sake of heaven, and an argument that's not for the sake of heaven? And the example that we give of an argument for the sake of heaven was Hillel and Shammai. But the argument that we give or the example that we give for an argument that's not for the sake of heaven is Korach and his followers.
Yeah.
I think we've done that together. So yes, he was not conducting himself and challenging. There's no problem in Judaism with asking questions and trying to figure out if things are fair or unfair or whatever it is, but the way that he went about doing it is remembered forever as the wrong way of doing things.
Because Moshe challenged Hashem many times.
Yeah.
In the last century, surprising the way he challenged Hashem. But he did it for the sake of heaven. He did it for goodness, not for his own aggrandizement.
That's it. Very good. Alrighty, guys. Let's call up Pirkei Avot onto the screen. Here we go. Ready? Boom. There it is. Everyone see that? If it's difficult to read, switch over into speaker view. I'll spotlight myself as well, just so that the recording doesn't flip between different people, whatever. So, we are on chapter 5, Mishnah 8 of Pirkei Avot with our final 10. If you see at the bottom of the screen there, the next Mishnah will actually go on to talking about a 7. But this one's talking about a 10. So, who would like to read us the Mishnah?
Read the end sentence. The end bit.
It's been moved over a bit.
Yeah, you have to move over a little bit.
What's happened?
The end is
That's interesting. How have I done that?
That's it.
That's it. I'm not sure how that's happened. Okay, thank you.
Right, okay. 10 things were created on the eve of the Sabbath of twilight, and these are they: 1, mouth of the earth; 2, mouth of the world; 3, the mouth of the donkey; 4, the rainbow; 5, the manna; 6, the staff, Moses; 7, the shamir; 8, the letters; 9, the writing; 10, and the tablets. Some say also demons, the grave of Moses and the ram of Abraham our father, and some say and also tongs made with tongs.
Very good. Right, I anticipate that not everybody will understand what each of these things are. So, shall we perhaps start by starting to understand what some of these things are? Fundamentally, what we're being told is that there were 10 things that were created at twilight on Erev Shabbos. So this would perhaps be after Hashem has finished creating the world. I would anticipate perhaps it's even after the episode there of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. And the Mishnah is telling us that there are 10, let's call them miracles. I'll tell you why in a minute. 10 miracles that were created at this point in creation. So, we ask every week, why 10? There's definitely more than 10 miracles that have occurred throughout history. But these seem to be 10 one-off events or one-off things that were coded into the world at this point in the creation story. These are like the finishing touches, so to speak, and it seems that these things will have been required at one point in history, and so they needed to be written into the story of creation, so to speak, so that they could happen. So these are specific things that we're going to run through that have happened at a point in history. And it's interesting, actually. According to Maimonides, it means that these things were built into nature. So even though they're miraculous, and things like the talking donkey of Bilam, and the mouth of the earth, which refers, as I said, to the hole that opened up to swallow Korach and his followers, and the manna which arrived miraculously. All of these things that were deviations from the natural way. So the Rambam Maimonides says they're built into nature. So it's not that they are complete freaks of nature. They were built into the system right from the very beginning. They were set, put the time switch on, so to speak, so that they only pop up at a particular point in history. But Hashem didn't create something new at those times. So let's take, for example, the mouth of the donkey. So the story of Bilam is that he's on his way to curse the Jewish people, and he's riding his donkey, and there's an angel in front of the donkey, and the donkey can't pass the angel, and Bilam's busy hitting the donkey to try and get him to move, and all of a sudden his mouth opens and he speaks to Bilam. Wow, what a freak of nature that is. What a miracle. So according to Maimonides, the ability for the donkey to speak in that instance will have been programmed into the system, as it were, so that whenever it is needed in history, it's there ready and waiting. And these things therefore were created at this point of creation, right at the end of the sixth day, right before Shabbat came in. That's the opinion, it seems, of Maimonides. Nachmanides says that nature can change, and everything is miraculous, and these are just examples of divine interventions which deviate from what we perceive as nature, but really they're no less miraculous than anything else. We're used to the fact that you water a plant and then it grows, but that's a miracle as well. It's a miracle of Hashem's creation that these things can happen. So these were kind of, according to Nachmanides and according to the Ramban, these are 10 instances where it deviates. There's divine intervention to deviate from what we would call nature, but really everything is miraculous. We say in our Amida prayer every day in Modim, the prayer for gratitude, we say V'al nisecha sheb'chol yom imanu, the miracles that you do every single day, V'al nifla'otecha v'torotecha sheb'chol eit erev v'avoker v'tzaharayin, the wonders and the amazing things that you do each and every single moment, erev v'avoker, morning and evening, the whole time. Everything is a miracle if we really sit and reflect on the way that the world works. So two different ways of looking at these things, either as a freak one-off occurrence that was programmed into the system to occur, or a one-off occurrence that just highlights how everything is miraculous. Whichever way we look at it, these are 10 unique things that were created for particular points in history. And why were they put in right at the end after everything else is created? Well, perhaps one of the reasons there is that Shabbos is the day on which we're supposed to realize that really everything comes from Hashem, and Hashem created everything. And even these things which come right on the cusp and right on the brink of Shabbos, everything is created by Hashem. Hashem controls the world. Hashem controls all of nature. And so these 10 things as well are no different to that. So let's talk about what some of these things are. The Mishnah starts off with Pi Haaretz, which, as we said, is the hole, the ground that miraculously opened up and swallowed the specific individuals that it needed to swallow, and then it closed up again and life continued as normal. So I don't know if anyone saw the footage coming out of Israel this week, but there was a sinkhole in the car park at the hospital in Jerusalem, Shaarei Tzedek. So this is different to just a sinkhole or an earthquake. It may have the experience may have looked like that, but the point is that this particular occurrence, the mouth opened up, targeted exactly who it needed to target, and then closed up again afterwards. Rita, do you have a question?
I've got a question, and hopefully it's a good one as well. Why was no name mentioned? The mouth of the earth.
What do you mean? Why?
What is the name of the person mentioned?
You mean why does the Mishnah leave it so vague and not
so-
say explicitly
Not detailed.
the
Not
hole
detailed.
that swallowed up Korach and his?
Yeah, but it doesn't say that, does it?
So I would probably answer to that the Mishnah in every instance tries to not waste words. So because this is a one-off occurrence, what other pi haaretz could there possibly be?
Well, I wouldn't have known unless you told me just, 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago about the fast obviously.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known who it was.
That's because we're on a continuous journey to expand our minds and learn more and more and more. But we always find ourselves in this situation that after thousands of years, we're a little rusty on some of these things. But writing in a terse and concise way, and certainly writing for an audience that historically may have known about all of these episodes, the pi haaretz would only really refer to one thing, and then it would have got to a point in history where people found it challenging to understand what pi haaretz means, and that's why you'll have commentators who will spell that out for us and will say this is the hole that opened up for Korach, and that's the way that learning has always developed. That from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, right, when these teachings will have first started being taught, everyone would have been like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, that happened to Uncle Korach, right? But as time went on and we got further and further away from these things, so the commentaries will have identified for us what these things are. But to maintain a concise and to not waste words approach to writing these things down, that's the language that has been chosen.
Right. Can I ask you the last question on that? I'll just thank you very much for the explanation. But so it couldn't have been anybody else on that one. Was it the only time where God just makes the hole and just swallow them all? Or
from the miraculous perspective, there have been countless earthquakes and sinkholes, etc. But this is focusing on the episode, the one that we all know about, as it were. And as I said, historically, it would have been much easier to know what they were talking about. There were no options back then. That was the only one that had happened. That happened in such a miraculous way. Nowadays we can say, well, what about the earthquake that happened there, and the sinkhole that happened there, and this, history has given us too many options. But once upon a time, this was, as good as taken. There were no other pi haaretzes that could really be entertained as being what the Mishnah is referring to. So pi habe'er. Pi habe'er, again, the mouth of the well. Which well? There are lots of wells. Well, this is referring to the miraculous water source that followed the Jewish people around the desert. It was brought in Miriam's merit. And for the 40 years that the Jewish people wanted the desert, from the point that they complained about having a lack of water, and Moses was told to hit the rock, and that rock burst forth with water, and that water stayed with the Bnei Israel for all of the 40 years that they were in the desert. So that was also excuse me, that was also created at this point of Bein Hashmashot. At this Be'erev Shabbos, Bein Hashmashot, Miriam's well, which continuously flowed water for the Jewish people while they were in the desert. Number 3, Pi Ha'aton was the mouth of the donkey, where again it's most unusual that a donkey can speak, but perhaps, certainly following from Nachmanides, we're supposed to appreciate just how miraculous it is that human beings can speak. Why shouldn't a donkey be able to speak? Hashem can make anything happen. Yeah, so he did. He made it happen for this donkey. It was a freak occurrence, as it were, but we are supposed to learn nonetheless that the ability for us to speak is just as miraculous. Number 4 is the Keshes. It's the rainbow. It would seem that the first time ever that a rainbow appeared was when?
I'm not going to say as a sign when the ark landed, they got off, because it happens before then.
When did it happen before then?
Whenever the sun and the rain occurred at the same time.
How do you know?
Because that's what science, and that's what I've heard from other rabbis, that it wasn't the first time. It was just designated after that as a sign.
Oh, well, if you've heard it from other rabbis, then I guess I don't have much to say. I thought that I
can't name them, right?
I thought I read that one of the things I came across was that it was the first time. Let me see if I'm right.
Years ago, I specifically remember asking the question, was it the first time? And I was told no.
So I've got a note here in the green Pirkei Avos book, which says that Rashi and Rabbeinu Yonah maintain that the rainbow, which had existed since creation, because it's telling us here that Hashem created it, was first seen after the flood. So
the rainbow is the only one of these, I think, which occurs naturally, is it not?
It does.
You say naturally.
Nothing happens naturally.
But
no, I mean, when I say naturally, I mean, as Gary said, it rains, the sun comes out, and you get a rainbow. That's what we understand from the rainbow.
Nachon.
So
maybe the other Rabbonim felt that it may have occurred but not been seen by human beings.
Well,
maybe that's what I understood. This was the first time anybody had ever seen a rainbow.
That's very interesting. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound?
Does it still fall? Or
yeah.
if
light refracts through rain pellets,
it doesn't hear me. Am I still wrong?
So yes. So that's interesting, Gary. I thank you for that contribution. I don't know how else to interpret it, because I haven't seen anything else. So I'm gonna stick to my guns on that one, Gary. If that's all right.
Okay.
Where's your face, Gary?
Oh, you don't want to see that right now.
Oh, I don't want to see it right now. You haven't had your hair done. All right. So number 5 is the manna. That was also a freak of nature, in the sense that food does not fall from the sky. Certainly not. I mean, it falls as rain and nourishes trees, and trees make fruit, but the actual food like this does not fall from the sky. Miraculously enveloped in layers of dew to protect it, and miraculously disappear when the day has finished. These are just some of the things that we're taught about the manna. That it would turn into a stream. It would all melt and wash away after each day, and then the new supply would come raining in. And I recall hearing other amazing things about it, that depending on the strength of your connection with the Almighty would determine where your manna fell. So if you woke up and found it outside your door, you'd know that you were in a good place. If you had to traverse to the other side of the camp, it would seem also that somehow they knew which portion had been designated divinely for which individual. So if you had to travel all the way to the end of the camp to find your manna, you'd know that you weren't in a very good place. So that is number 5. Number 6, the staff of Moses. He carried with him a sapphire stick staff, which it seems was put into place as part of the plan of creation. And this was the staff that Moses used to perform all of his miracles, to perform all of Hashem's miracles. According to tradition, actually, it belonged to Adam and was passed through from generation to generation until it came to Moshe. So this staff was in existence since the beginning of the world. Number 7, V'hashamir. Shamir is a quite an amazing thing, really. The shamir was a worm, and this worm is known from tradition to be capable of cutting through stones. Scientifically, biologically, I would have no idea how to explain this to you, but we are taught that the shamir worm was used to carve the stones and the bricks needed to build a temple. And the reason why they had to use this is because there was a rule that they couldn't use iron implements or metallic implements to cut things for the temple, because they are associated with war and with violence. And so rather than use symbols of violence to build the temple, they used this miraculous shamir. Parallels have been made with the shamir and laser technology, but again, I'm no expert on this kind of thing. But it's there are a lot of sources that talk about the shamir and how it had to be contained in a particular type of container, which would be impervious to the strength of this shamir. I don't know. The point is, though, that this worm was created right from the very beginning of creation, and when it was needed, it was available, and it was needed for carving out the stones and the bricks to build the temple. Vahaksav, number 8, which Rashi says refers to the shapes of the Hebrew letters that would go into the Sefer Torah, into the Torah scroll. So this was the point at which Hashem created the Hebrew alphabet. Number 9, Hamichtav, is the way in which these letters were put onto the Ten Commandments. So the first luchot, the first tablets of stone, seem to originate from this point in the creation story, and the miraculous way in which they were visible and legible from both sides of the tablets. Whichever way you were looking at it, somehow you would miraculously see the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, written the correct way round. So usually when you look at something one way, and you turn it the other way, so now you're seeing a reflected image of it. But somehow with these tablets, it was miraculous. Whichever direction you looked from, you were seeing the Aseret HaDibrot written properly from right to left. And they also talk about how miraculously, if you think about the way a samach looks, or a final mem, so those are enclosed letters with a hole in the middle. And miraculously, the hole, which would still be there in the engraving, somehow hovered in place. So these are the miraculous luchot that were created by Hashem. And number 10 is the luchos. So michtav is the writing that went onto the luchos, and the luchos, number 10, the tablets themselves, is number 10. V'yesh omrim, the Mishnah said, there are those who say af hamazikin, also the demons, the negative spiritual forces, were created at this point in creation. And they talk about here about how by having the presence of these lurking dangers, however we might choose to interpret these things, is supposed to reinforce how we need to constantly depend on Hashem. So it's all part of the creation, realizing that Hashem is in control and Hashem is in charge. So it seems that these forces were created at this point in creation as well. And the next one is, what's the next one? Ukvuraso shel Moshe is a possibility as being one of the 10. The grave site of Moshe was created at the beginning of creation. When it was needed, it was provided. Moshe was buried. And now we have absolutely no idea where that burial plot is. It's an interesting thing if we think about it. We know where everyone, all of our greatest leaders, our greatest prophets, we know pretty much where everyone's buried. But Moshe Rabbeinu, we were never told where he was buried. And part of the reason for this is that we didn't want, or Hashem didn't want Moshe's burial place to become a center of focus, a center of attention, a tourist attraction, something that could be manipulated, something that could be abused. So for that reason, we never come to know where Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. And the next one they bring is Ve'elo shel Avraham Avinu, the ram which miraculously appeared at the Akedah. Right? Avraham takes Isaac up, he binds him down to the altar, he's about to slaughter him, and Hashem tells him to stop. And then the next thing that we know is that this ram has been discovered, and Avraham takes that ram instead to offer up as a sacrifice to Hashem instead of his son. So that ram, it seems, was created from the point of creation, ready and waiting to be needed as soon as the time was right. V'yeshomrim af tzvas b'tzvas asuya, and the final one, the final potential inclusion for the list of 10 is the tongs which made tongs. What does this mean? So from the onset of creation, there was a point when we were able to manufacture different things and manipulate and work with metal. But to do that, to handle all of these hot metals, you need a pair of tongs. So how do you go about making the first pair of tongs? So the Mishnah tells us that these tongs were provided miraculously. Hashem created them so that mankind would have a set of tongs from which they could make future tongs and be able to manipulate and work with metal. So the first tool was created by Hashem. Everything after that would have been created by man. And therefore, the Mishnah, I guess, or part of the way that this gets learnt is that the Mishnah is encouraging us to remember and to realize that ultimately everything comes from Hashem. So this first tool came from Hashem as well. There's also an amazing idea here, which is that Hashem provided the opportunity for us to be able to create these things and to be able to improve the world and improve our lives through technology. But it has to be steered by a sense of morality. We have to realize that at the top of everything, at the beginning of everything, is a God who sets forth how things should be utilized and how things should be used. So it's kind of like a message for mankind as well, that whatever we're going to create, whatever we're going to develop, whatever we're going to invent, we have to have in mind that these things are supposed to improve the world, because we know how technology could destroy us. And we know of all the occasions throughout human history where technology has been used to destroy and to afflict and to injure and to harm. So there, in the end of this Mishnah here, is a message for us, number one, that we have to be steered by a sense of morality, appreciate that Hashem ultimately brought these things to the world for us to use and to manipulate. And number two, that there's nothing that's really new. everything can be traced back to Hashem. He's given us the raw materials to work with. He's given us the creative thinking, but ultimately, we might be the ones to produce things, but it all comes from Hashem. So whether or not he actually created a physical set of tongs for which future metalwork and future creativity could be generated from, or whether it means that he sets the agenda and he paved the way for the world to be able to create things and invent things. Either way, Hashem is at the core and at the source of all of those things. So, ladies and gentlemen, any points, comments, or questions on that which we have been covering? Rita?
Yeah, I've got, I think, a good question. The first time I heard that the worm was engraving the tablets, I thought it came from God, all done up, all done, and then obviously we acquired it. So to me, the worm was the first time I heard of it. I'm not disputing it.
No, the worm was used for the temple. Hashem engraved the luchot.
But you said before the worm helped to engrave, or I misunderstood?
The worm was used. This miraculous worm somehow has the ability to cut through things that otherwise couldn't be cut through. Right? So this worm was used to help build the temple. Our tradition teaches us. Separately to that, Hashem engraved the first set of tablets. He created the first set of tablets. He engraved the first set of tablets. They were miraculous in the sense that the letters hovered in place and they could be read both sides, whichever way you were looking at. But that's different to the Shamir. That's different to the worm. The second set of tablets were written by Moshe when he went back up onto Mount Sinai. But this first set seems to have been miraculous. This was the set that Moshe smashed.
Yeah.
But they were originally miraculous and shaped by Hashem himself.
Okay, thank you.
Do we know who put together this list of 10 items?
We know that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, is the composer and the compiler of the Mishnah. So he will have been the one that ultimately sealed the deal. But these will have been discussed and these will have been in circulation for hundreds, if not thousands, of years before that. Ever since Moshe taught the Torah to the Jewish people. There's actually one interpretation that says that this Mishnah was not revealed until after his lifetime because it talks about his grave and all these kinds of things. So whichever way, it still traces back to the Jewish people way back then, and it would have been discussed verbally for the generations, but it will have been Rabbi Judah the Prince who ultimately wrote it into the book.
Right.
Yeah.
So the worm, going back to the temple, I've got this thing about this worm.
We all do.
This worm helped to build Aron HaKodesh. Were there human beings as well who helped?
To build the temple, Rita, the bricks, the enormous bricks that were carved out, and all of the different things that needed cutting. They seem to have used these miraculous worms rather than any metal blades to be able to cut through things.
Okay, amazing worm.
It is an amazing worm. We don't, we don't know what the modern day equivalent of this worm would be. It seems to have existed at a point in history to serve the purpose of building the temple, and does not seem to be in circulation anymore.
Very interesting, because the first time I heard this about the worm, never really, all my life I've read this or seen it before.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So Neil, it takes a little longer to get through on Lunch and Learn than it does when you read them out in the morning. But
There's one thing I read recently, and it was also that fascinated me. In the temple during the sacrifices, I think if we visualize it or try to make a picture in our mind, it would have been like a bloodbath. There would have been blood and guts everywhere and a stench that we would never know. But no flies.
that's what we did last week. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, Hashem made it that there were no flies, no maggots, no nothing. And in fact, there wasn't a smell.
That's right.
Last week.
That was last week's mission. I've just put it up on the screen there for you. That's exactly what we were talking about last week.
That was amazing.
One of the things that we actually mentioned was that the environment of the Temple Mount is actually a what would you call it? Like a microcosm of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, life pre the sin, and actually in the Garden of Eden, that would have been the natural way in which the world was meant to be. No decay, no flies, no smell, no putrefaction. It's only post the sin of Adam and Eve that those things became part of the natural reality and the natural order. But the temple managed to somehow, well, not managed to, Hashem made it that the temple existed in this different reality. It existed in a plane of life before the sin. In this Edenic paradise. So that's what you would expect from the Garden of Eden, that there would be no flies and there would be no decay and there would be no smell and no rotting. It's just hard for us to hear it because we live in a world of those things and we experience those things as miracles, but actually it's just a different coding of nature, as it were. But yeah, Rita, were you going to ask?
Yeah, I've got to ask. Right, now we've finished the tens. How many tens did we have?
That was the 8th one, I think. That was our 8th Mishnah. Was the first one also a 10? Yeah. So we've had 8 tens.
So that's 80 miracles.
Well,
Not miracles.
it's I would say it is 8 points of significance that happen to be united by the number 10,
Okay.
rather than a group of 80. It might be a group of 80, but I don't know for certain that would be an accurate way of saying it. At the very least, it's 8 significant groupings of 10.
Yeah.
Why 8? Why 10? I still haven't seen anything. You know, we said that 10 is a good number. It's the number that represents completion and the totality of something. But I don't have much more that I can say about those things. Still,
The one
after 8
today,
weeks.
which just learned today, are
Yeah.
more or less miracles.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these have been tied into miracles. Although there were 10 generations, there were 10 tests, etc., etc. The last few have been about miracles, haven't they? Yeah, 10 miracles for our ancestors in Egypt, and 10 at the sea. 10 miracles in the Beis Hamikdash. 10 amazing feats of nature that were created just before Shabbat. That's the ones that we saw today. Everything's a miracle, Rita. You're a miracle. I'm a miracle.
This chapter 5 of Pirkei Avot is the most difficult to comprehend. All the others are discussions about morality and the way of life. This is just a bit of a history, nature. It doesn't really fit well into Pirkei Avot, other than it's just a statement of things that happened or perceived to have happened.
Well, if you remember some 30,000 years ago, if you remember some 30,000 years ago when we started Pirkei Avot together, we talked about how we call it the ethics of our fathers because Avot means fathers. But we also gave the interpretation that Avot are the category headings, the topic headings of everything, the foundations, the building blocks. So this chapter still provides us an understanding of the building blocks, of the fundamentals of Hashem being in charge, of Hashem running the show, and Hashem steering everything throughout history. So you're right. From an ethical point of view, it doesn't necessarily speak to us in the same way the other chapters have. But from the point of view of the foundations and the building blocks of everything, it's still part of the Avot, the overarching categories from which we're supposed to determine our attitude to life. I think, just my opinion. Martin disagrees. Tizzy is right.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying it doesn't.
Yeah.
It is part of life, but it doesn't. It's difficult that it fits. We can discuss all the other things more easily and say, well, what does this mean? How does this reflect on my behaviour? How do I behave because of learning this particular thing? Whereas most of this chapter, not all, but most of it, are just statements of fact that it's difficult to accept in the modern thought process that we have, but it's part of our history and tradition and belief.
Beautiful. Yeah. Rita.
Yeah, sorry, I've asked so many questions.
Everyone else is asleep. It's just Rita, Peter, Neil, and Martin.
Yeah, Rita and Peter, we're part of it. Just I've got a question on Monday. On the Monday.
Yeah.
And then I went to bed and think about it, so funny enough. We're talking about Noah, just to put people in the picture. How long did the flood last? How long was Noah on this boat?
So it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And then there was up until the end of a year that he was on the boat.
So it was a year, 365 days on that boat?
Approximately, yes. If I say approximately and it was exactly 365 days, then great. But no, it was around about a year that he was on the boat. But one of the things the Torah doesn't mention is that it took him 120 years just to build it.
You know, somebody's built an ark. I saw it in the paper the other day. It's moored in some. They were trying to get it moved because it's blocking the entrance to some port. But somebody's actually built an ark of wood identical in size to that measurement in the Torah. I must look it up on the net. It was in the paper. I mean, if one believes what's in the paper, and it showed a picture of it.
There's a museum.
It's because it's not seaworthy.
Oh, where is
so
it?
It can't
oh, is it just fact? I wondered whether it was an April Fool's thing.
No, it's there, but it can't. It was made over in Scandinavia, and they brought it over, but now they can't take it out of dock because the English people have said that it's not seaworthy to take back out again. It's costing them £10,000 a day till they can sort it out.
Where is it? Did you know whereabouts it is?
Not Portsmouth, Falmouth.
Ipswich.
It might be worth a visit to have a look. Can you get on it?
It's in Ipswich, I think.
Ipswich?
I mean, I've just typed it into Google.
Who goes up to Ipswich?
I've just typed it into Google and it's apparently in Ipswich.
There's
also an American.
What the intention was. But if they sailed it across the North Sea to England, then it must be seaworthy, surely.
It was towed.
I mean, if you can tow it across the North Sea, you can tow it anywhere.
And then there's also a museum in America I recall seeing about. I'm just looking for that now. In Williamstown, KY. Is that Kansas, KY?
Possibly Kentucky.
Oh, maybe Kentucky, okay. But yeah. There we go. But it wasn't the real deal. let's sign off on Facebook and YouTube and wish everybody a wonderful and meaningful day. And we'll see you all next time. And come carry on chatting on Zoom. In the meantime, Shabbat